The pollsters thought he might eke out a tie, but Javier Milei, the leader of Argentina, has actually captured a big win in midterm elections. I'm Scott Ott with Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, and this episode of Right Angle is brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com. Gentlemen, the pollsters were basically saying it's going to be close, but the Peronistas, the leftists in Argentina, are going to do what they typically do, and they're going to win the poor vote, and they're going to give Milei a tough run for his money. Milei, the so-called libertarian, who has garnered some support from our own President Trump here of late and on an ongoing basis. Stephen Green, what happened, though, surprised the pollsters. The suburbs where the poor live around Buenos Aires, apparently the poor have just said, I don't think this lefty stuff is going to work after giving it a good half-century try. And they went in significant numbers to Javier Milei. He won like 41% of the vote as far as his party, won 41% to the 32% of the leftists. And so now he's got enough votes to be able to control the legislative agenda, in effect, without going into too deep of detail here. Milei said on Sunday night after the election, the entire country chose to irreversibly change the destiny of the nation. Steve, do you think he's getting a little bit cocky, or is this legitimately a hinge moment in the history of Argentina and maybe beyond?
Well, Milei is a guy who makes his own luck, and part of the way he makes it is by being cocky. I think we've seen that in this country in a couple of recent elections with, that weird orange bad man that seems to be doing a pretty good job around here. Here's the thing. Milei got that big election win, even though apparently the Peronists put a libertarian-sounding party. They ran a libertarian-sounding party that got on the top of the ticket based on their name that confused people into voting for Peronist candidates, even though, So election shenanigans. They'd make excellent Democrats if they ever moved to this country. That said, here's what I think happened. There are little things that Milei did early in his term, one of which is he eliminated rent control, and at least in Buenos Aires, and all the experts, because they're wrong. Yeah. All the experts are like, this will be horrible. People would get screwed out of their apartments and such. But what happened is apartments that couldn't be rented profitably under rent control suddenly flooded the market. These apartments had just been taken off the market. It was dead capital. It was dead living space. And suddenly, if I remember correctly, the number of apartments on the market increased by like 40%. So you went from not being able to get an apartment at a fixed price to being able to afford an apartment because there are so many more suddenly available. And it's amazing when you're poor and you can find a place to live that you can afford, how well that focuses your mind on the guy and whose party and whose policies help to make that happen. And we're also seeing something else this year. The stock market is surging, so the rich people are going to be happy, at least the ones who aren't Peronis. But they're expecting, I believe it was over 8% real economic growth this year, or in the next year, thanks to Milei winning this election and being able to continue his policies. And nothing is permanent in politics. So when he says, this is irreversible, well, I don't know about that. But I think Milei's reelection is going to shape up to be like 1984 for Ronald Reagan. Because if you go back to 1984, in the first 3 quarters of that year, so the first 9 months leading up to the election in November, real wages in this country went up by more than 7% in those 9 months. Reagan won 60-40 against Mondale, who promised to undo all that and took 49 states. He probably could have won 50 if he had actually campaigned in Minnesota, Mondale's home state, but he decided to be the gentleman and not do that. And if Milei can keep going, and it looks like with this win he can, his next election is looking like Reagan in '84. It's going to be huge.
Bill Whittle, after his election initially, you heard a lot of the press in the U.S. basically saying, well, he's certainly not going to make it past the midterms. And this whole, the temporary enthusiasm for this particular personality, this guy was literally like a rock and roll musician who wrote, several self-congratulatory books. I just downloaded one, finally was able to get a U.S. copy of it for $10 on Kindle, and it's called The Making of a Miracle, written by Javier Milei. But the left here was basically saying, okay, well, yeah, he's a rock star, so that's the attraction. But when they get to the midterms and people actually have to vote for his ideas, that's going to change things. Bill, they voted for his ideas. They now have a chance to be tried.
Well, I was actually more concerned about this election than any other foreign election I can remember in a long time, for precisely those reasons. Milei was elected before Donald Trump, began taking a chainsaw to government a couple of years, I think, before Donald Trump, and had the austerity things and the cuts to the government and all the rest of it. And I was concerned about the same sort of thing. Would people stay with the program even when the program was, in spite of the fact that the program is showing success? Would that hold? What would poor people do? What would these so-called dispossessed voting communities do? And the fact that they stayed with him is not only good for Argentina, I think it's a very good sign for America. He's basically modeling in Argentina what Donald Trump is doing here. Yeah. And he had a referendum on his policies a year before we're going to get our referendum on our policies. And I think this is a sign of. I'm interested in the human nature aspect of. Obviously, the United States and Argentina are vastly different countries, but human nature, I think, is the same. And this encourages me because it goes along the same lines as the kind of videos I was seeing from the actual residents in D.C. who were saying, I hated Trump, I never voted for him, but my God, this is the first time I've been able to go out to dinner on or I don't have to, keep my head on a swivel at 2 o'clock in the morning at this traffic light so I don't get carjacked. It seems to be an indication that that results Trump ideology, if you'll pardon the expression, and I just take it as a very good sign for Argentina, which we need to have a sympathetic power in South America. South America is just a giant power vacuum. A strong Argentina that's aligned with American values. It's a long, long way from the dictators of the 1980s and so on. I think that'd be great for them, but mostly I'm happy for us because I think it's a real bellwether for how people, as I said, will stay with results that are working rather than revert to their ideological prejudices.
Yeah, from your lips, the midterms ears, Bill.
Yeah, and so goes the ignorant poor, apparently, who didn't know what they were doing.
No, voting against their own interests.
Yeah, so, it's the tough thing about being a conservative or a libertarian reformer, and when it comes to the economics of your country, is that you have to go in there and start turning off the spigot that the left had allowed to be open. And you have to do that because you've got to stop that flow before you get to the bottom of the well. And because the flow stops or dwindles to a trickle, people think it's your fault that you're facing tough times. So the real gutsy conservative or libertarian has to go in there and basically say, folks, this is going to suck for a while. Mm-hmm. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be challenging, but we can't get out of a problem that took decades to get into overnight. And in order to reverse, the left's ballot machine that they've been funding with your taxpayer dollars all these years, it's going to be some belt tightening. There's going to be some difficulties. So if you can get past the first midterm election, talking about a program like that and being pretty open as he has been about it, I think you've got a good thing going. And my relief in this midterm result is honestly just that he'll get a chance to try his ideas. And that's what happens so often in elections is like, the party that wants to do something gets elected, but not with enough of a controlling majority in whatever country they're in the legislature, in the executive branch, or in the judiciary for that matter, to be able to actually attempt to do the things that they said they wanted to do when they ran for office. And so Javier Milei will get an opportunity to do this. There'll be a chance to try it. And I think that the poor people, especially in suburban Buenos Aires, are saying what we've been encouraging the people of America's cities to say for a long time. How much worse could this get? Why don't we give it a shot? For Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making Right Angle possible.